At my rehearsal dinner, my 7-year-old son stood up, took the microphone from the DJ, and announced, "Before you kiss, I think you should hear what they said about me last night." The room fell silent, with the sound of a fork clinking against a plate echoing in the stillness as all eyes turned to him. Some laughed, expecting a joke, but I knew better. I was aware of what he was about to reveal. "My name is Aya Morgan. I'm 34, a single mom, and until that moment, I thought I was finally achieving my fairy tale ending by marrying Nathan, the love of my life, who had never once made my son feel like a burden. We were at the brink of a new beginning, surrounded by family, candlelight flickering, laughter bouncing off the barn walls. Yet, not everyone in that room was happy for us. My father, Charles, always more concerned with his public image than his private integrity, and my stepmother, Elise, who wore her judgments like perfume, were seated near the front. I had spent years watching her treat my son as an inconvenience. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it wasn't worth the fight, but the night before, I overheard something I could never forget. I remained silent during dinner, smiling, threw toasts to love and family, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Now, my son stood alone before everyone, gripping that microphone with both hands, his small face serious and resolute. I had no idea he had heard them too. What he said next changed everything. The barn appeared like a scene from a magazine, with string lights casting a warm glow over long wooden tables adorned with fresh greenery, ivory roses, and gold-rimmed glassware. It smelled of pine, candle wax, and something delicious baking in the kitchen. Guests kept commenting on how beautiful and perfect it all looked, which it was, at least on the surface. Inside, I felt like I was holding my breath. I kept one hand on my wine glass and the other on my son Liam, who sat beside me in a tiny dress shirt and suspenders, swinging his feet just above the floor, his hair still damp from the quick bath I had given him an hour earlier. He had blueberry stains on his sleeve and was humming softly while pushing a grape tomato around his plate. He looked so small in that chair, yet to me, he filled the entire room. I was set to marry a man who never made me feel like I had to choose between being a mother and being loved. Nathan was everything my son and I had ever needed: steady, kind, and present. He never talked down to Liam and always included him. The first time Liam fell sick with the flu, Nathan held the bucket and wiped his forehead, and that was when I realized I wanted to marry him. Now we were at our rehearsal dinner, surrounded by friends, co-workers, cousins, and even some people I hadn't seen in years, including my father Charles and his wife Elise. They sat at the center table, smiling for pictures, raising their glasses at every toast, pretending to be part of this story, even though they never had been. When my son was born, my father visited the hospital once, stayed less than 15 minutes, and left before holding him. Elise didn't come at all. She sent flowers that simply said best wishes, as if I had opened a bakery rather than given birth. When I returned to Asheville after my divorce, I reached out to them, hoping things might change, but they didn't. They invited me to brunches and fundraisers, introduced me as Isa, Charles's daughter, the one who works in education, but never mentioned that I was a mother or asked to see Liam. I used to convince myself it didn't matter, that we didn't need them, and while that was true, when I got engaged, I thought maybe this would be a new start. I imagined standing before them as a bride, with my son by my side and a man who truly loved me waiting at the altar, might shift something in them. So, I invited them to the dinner. Elise wore a cream designer dress and pearls the size of grapes, gave a brief toast complimenting the lighting and the wine, then sat down as if waiting for applause. My dad laughed at all the wrong moments and seemed annoyed when Liam tried to show him a paper airplane he'd made from a menu. I caught the tight-lipped, cold look Elise gave him, as if she was embarrassed by him. Liam didn't notice. He was too busy watching Nathan talk to the bartender and asking me if there would be dancing after dinner. I thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe they will never be what I want them to be. But I have my son and I have Nathan, and that's everything. He turned to me and asked, "Mama, are we going to be a real family tomorrow?" I smiled, brushing a crumb off his cheek. "We already are, baby." His eyes lit up, and he leaned his head against my shoulder. I kissed the top of his head and held him close, letting his weight settle into my side. That moment was real. The part I wanted to remember, not the stiff nods from Elise or my father's distracted gaze. Just me and my son and this small, quiet promise between us. Nathan walked over, tousled Liam's hair, and kissed my temple. "You two look like a postcard," he said, laughing. For a moment, I believed in that picture until later that night when I passed by my father's hotel room while dropping off Liam's overnight bag. The door wasn't fully closed, and I heard Elise's voice and my father's reply, hearing everything that came after. At the dinner, with soft music playing and fairy lights glowing around us, I was still pretending the cracks in the frame didn't matter, and my son was still smiling. The hallway smelled of citrus cleaner and carpet glue as I walked Liam back from the pool, his overnight bag slung over one shoulder and a towel dragging behind him like a cape. He chattered about cannonballs and how many cookies he thought he could sneak from the front desk. I smiled and nodded, half listening, my mind occupied with last-minute preparations for the wedding. As we turned the corner toward our room, I passed my father's suite. The door was slightly ajar, the kind of careless mistake people make when they think they're alone. I paused for just a second to pull the towel off Liam's foot, and that's when I heard her voice. "Once they leave for the honeymoon, put the boy in care. We're not babysitters." My whole body froze. My father replied, "He doesn't fit the new image anyway. A ring bearer, maybe, but not a long-term accessory. It's not like he's ours." Liam had stopped talking and looked up at me with wide, questioning eyes, tightening his grip on my hand. I didn't say anything. I just took his towel, opened our room, and guided him inside. Once the door shut, I leaned against it, my heart racing in my chest. I looked at my son. He had already climbed onto the bed and was flipping through his comic book, his small feet swinging as if nothing had happened. I didn't know if he had fully heard. I hoped he hadn't. I wanted to believe he was still floating in that innocent space where adults are safe and families are forever, but I had heard every word and couldn't unhear it. I stood in the middle of the room, fists clenched at my sides, my throat tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march down that hallway, throw open the door, and make them repeat it to my face. I wanted to demand they look at Liam and say those words out loud again. Instead, I sat at the edge of the bed and picked up one of his socks from the floor, folding and unfolding it, trying to keep my breathing steady. I had spent my whole life seeking my father's approval. When my mom died, I thought maybe he'd draw closer, but he remarried a woman who erased everything soft from our home and replaced it with crystal and silence. I spent years accepting crumbs of attention, hoping one day it would feel like love. It never did, but I kept trying. Now they were talking about my son as if he were a burden to be hidden, as if he didn't matter, as if he weren't mine. I thought about Nathan and how he held Liam's hand when we crossed the street, about the night Liam had a fever and Nathan stayed up all night reading him stories, about the time he called Liam my boy at a barbecue, lighting up Liam's whole face. This wedding was supposed to celebrate that love, to promise that our little family was real and permanent. But how could I proceed knowing my father thought my child didn't belong? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Liam, watching. The rise and fall of his chest. His fingers curled gently against his cheek, replaying the words over and over. Put the boy in care. He doesn't fit the new image. I wanted to believe I could ignore it, that I could let them attend the wedding, pose for pictures, give their stiff hugs, and then disappear from our lives for good. But ignoring it felt like a betrayal, not just of Liam, but of myself. In the morning, I looked in the mirror while brushing my teeth. My eyes were red, and my smile felt wrong. I tried to shake it off. I told myself, just get through today. Smile for the rehearsal dinner, thank the guests tomorrow, say your vows, then cut them off forever. But when I zipped Liam into his outfit that evening, he paused and looked up at me. "Mom," he asked, his voice small and quiet, "did Grandpa forget to hug me yesterday?" My hands froze on the zipper. He wasn't asking for attention, he was seeking reassurance. He wanted to know if he still mattered. I knelt down, cupped his face, and kissed his forehead. "You are everything," I said. "Anyone who can't see that is wrong." He nodded slowly, but I saw it in his eyes. He had heard more than I wanted him to. He felt the shift. I stood up, heart racing, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let them pretend anymore. I wouldn't allow them to smile for photos and play gracious grandparents for show. I didn't know how it would unfold or what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't stay silent again. The morning of the wedding rehearsal, the air outside was cool and clean, but my chest felt tight. I stood at the sink in the bridal suite, brushing my hair while Liam sat behind me on the couch, working on a coloring book Nathan had packed for him. Every so often he'd call out to me to check if he was staying in the lines. "Look at the wings on this dragon, Mama," he said. I turned, forcing a smile. "It looks amazing, sweetheart." He smiled and returned to coloring. I watched him for a moment longer, trying to memorize the curve of his smile, the way he bit his lip when he concentrated. He was still just a little boy, but he had already been exposed to something he never should have heard. Something he never should have had to carry. I barely spoke to my father or Elise that morning. I couldn't look at either of them without hearing their voices from the night before. I envisioned their faces at dinner, acting like everything was fine, laughing, toasting, pretending I had always known Elise didn't love my son. She tolerated him, treated him like a distant obligation, but hearing her say it so casually as if he were a stray someone had brought home ripped something wide open inside me. And worse than that was hearing my father agree, without hesitation or defense. They didn't just not love him, they didn't see him. And now, I couldn't unsee who they were. I paced the room, phone in hand, debating whether I should call Nathan. I could tell him everything. We could cancel the dinner or the wedding or all of it. He would listen. He always did. But then, would I be the dramatic daughter again, ruining her own wedding with another outburst? Would anyone believe me? I had no recording, no proof, just a memory that burned every time I blinked. And then there was Liam. I looked at him again, kneeling on the floor, sorting through his crayons. He had put on his little brown shoes without being asked. He was trying. So hard to be good, easy, helpful. My heart ached with the weight of it. There was a knock on the door. Nathan stepped in, holding 2 coffees. He kissed my cheek and handed me one. "Everything okay?" he asked, searching my face. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." He reached over to straighten my necklace. "Well, it's your big day. Try to breathe." I wanted to tell him. I really did. But I also didn't want this day to be defined by them. They had taken so much already. I wasn't going to let them take this too. Instead, I told myself I'd wait until after the wedding. I'd cut them out, I'd draw a firm line, and we'd build our life without them. That would be my revenge. No anger, no confrontation, just absence. That was the plan. Quiet, clean, controlled. But that plan began to unravel the moment we stepped into the rehearsal dinner. The barn looked beautiful again, just like the night. Before, long tables, candles, soft music, but it felt different this time. Everyone was a little more dressed up. The photographer moved between tables, snapping candid shots, and the DJ tested his equipment at the front of the room. Liam sat next to Nathan, showing him a drawing he'd made of our family. Then I saw my father and Elise arrive. She wore a navy silk dress with matching heels, and my father was in a freshly pressed gray suit, a gold watch visible beneath the cuff. They smiled politely as they greeted guests, nodding at Nathan's parents, posing for photos, acting like the kind of people who belonged in a wedding album. I stayed at my table and watched them, and the longer I watched, the more it burned. They didn't deserve to be there. Not after what they said, not after how they made my son feel. I was halfway through standing up when Liam tugged on my sleeve. "Mama, are there going to be speeches again?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Probably some toasts like last night." "Can I say something?" he asked, his eyes wide and excited. "Like a speech? I want to say something nice." I froze. "You want to say something at the microphone?" I asked, unsure. He nodded a little. I smiled. "Maybe. We'll see." I should have said no. I should have prepared for what he might do. But part of me believed he just wanted to thank Nathan or tell a funny story. He was always so thoughtful, always paying attention. And if I'm honest, part of me was too tired to think it through. The evening moved forward. Plates were cleared, glasses refilled, and the DJ adjusted the mic, announcing it was time for speeches. I listened as Nathan's father told a story about our first dinner together, and my maid of honor shared an embarrassing memory from college. The room warmed with laughter, wine, and easy joy. Then the DJ started handing out microphones, and Liam stood up. That was the moment I realized my silence hadn't protected him. He had heard, he had seen, and now he had something to say. Liam stood up before I could say anything. His chair scraped softly against the floor. He held the microphone in both hands, gripping it like it was something sacred. His little face was serious and calm, but his shoulders were tense. The DJ looked at me for approval. I gave a small nod, though my heart was racing. I didn't know what my son was about to say, but the air in the room shifted, feeling like the moment before a storm, when everyone senses something coming without knowing why. Liam looked out at the crowd. Dozens of faces turned toward him, most smiling gently, expecting something sweet or cute. A few chuckled, thinking a child's speech would be brief and harmless. At the center table, my father set down his wine glass and leaned back, while Elise barely looked up from her phone. Liam raised the microphone to his mouth, his voice clear. "Before you kiss," he said, "I think you should hear what they said about me last night." The room fell completely silent. Not just quiet, but silent. You could hear the buzz of the speakers, the soft creak of a chair shifting. People stopped chewing and forks hovered midair. My stomach dropped. Liam turned to look at my father and Elise. His voice didn't waver. "I was behind the couch in your room. I heard you. You said I should be put in care. You said I don't fit, that I'm not part of the family." Someone in the back gasped. I felt like I had stopped breathing. I stood up slowly, my hand on the edge of the table, my chest tight, but my eyes were locked on my son. Liam looked back at the guests. "But my mom says I am part of the family. She says I'm everything, and Nathan says I'm his boy too." Nathan stood up and walked to him. He placed a hand gently on Liam's shoulder, then looked out at the stunned room. "He is," Nathan said. "He's my son. I've known that since the second time I met him when he fell asleep in my arms and drooled on my shirt." Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft and shocked, a release of the tension that had been building like a pressure valve ready to burst. Nathan looked at me. "Ayla, come here." I walked to them, my legs shaking, my heart pounding. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I just knew I needed to be next to them. When I reached Liam, I knelt down beside him, brushed the hair off his forehead, and kissed his cheek. He looked at me, waiting. I stood up and took the microphone from his hand, turning to face my father. "You once told me that family was about loyalty," I said. "You said that when I was 15 and I lied. To protect a friend, you told me family came first. Here you are, sitting in a room full of people who love my son, and you couldn't even pretend to include him." I looked at Elise. "You've never accepted him. That was your choice. But speaking about a child like he's some inconvenient package you're forced to carry, that was never yours to say." I turned back to the room. For anyone here who believes Liam isn't part of this family, feel free to leave. Because tomorrow when I walk down that aisle, I'm not just becoming Nathan's wife. I'm standing up there as a mother who will never again stay silent to keep other people comfortable. No one moved. My father shifted slightly in his seat. Elise looked stunned. They hadn't expected to be called out. Not by a child, not in public. Nathan took the microphone. "There's no part of this family that Liam doesn't fit. If anything, he's the heart of it. I'm proud to be his dad, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life proving that." Applause broke out, starting softly but growing as people stood, wiping their eyes. My maid of honor stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Liam, while my father, Charles Morgan, sat with his arms crossed, silent. That was the moment everything changed. Not just the dynamic between us, but something deep within me. For the first time in my life, I had not swallowed the pain to protect the peace. I had let it rise, let it speak, and it had come out of the mouth of the one person they tried to erase. I held Liam's hand, and we walked back to our table. Nathan sat on my other side, his fingers brushing against mine. Liam leaned in and whispered, "Did I mess it up?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You told the truth, and truth, in that moment, was the most beautiful thing in the room." The morning of the wedding arrived, and the sky was clear, sunlight filtering through the trees and illuminating the small chapel where we were to say our vows. The air smelled of lilacs and warm grass. Everything looked perfect, but this time it wasn't the decorations or the setting that mattered. It was the people who showed up. We had fewer guests than expected, several of my father's business associates, some distant cousins from his side, and a couple of Elise's social acquaintances had canceled overnight. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. The silence of those who quietly chose sides spoke louder than any message they could have sent, but the ones who stayed were there with full hearts. Nathan's parents helped tie Liam's bow tie. My best friend printed a last-minute speech that included Liam's name in every paragraph, and my college roommate flew in early that morning, bringing 2 giant trays of homemade cookies because, she said, "Love deserves cookies." I stood at the back of the chapel, holding Liam's hand. He looked up at me in his tiny gray suit, still slightly crooked no matter how many times we tried to straighten it. He held a small pillow with our rings tied to it, his eyes wide yet calm. "You ready, Mama?" he asked. I took a breath and nodded. "Let's walk." And so we did. We walked together down the aisle, past rows of people smiling with their whole faces. I didn't need a father to give me away. I had already given myself away 1,000 times to people who never deserved it. Not anymore. When we reached the altar, Nathan stepped forward. He didn't just look at me, he looked at Liam. He bent down, met his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for walking your mom to me." Liam nodded, proud and serious, then handed Nathan the pillow and stepped to the side, joining the wedding party without anyone asking him to. He just knew. The ceremony was short, but every word landed deeply. The vows Nathan wrote didn't just speak to me, they spoke to the life we were building together. He promised to love me, protect our home, and honor the boy who came with me. He said, loving Liam was never a condition of being with me. It was part of how he loved me. There was no version of our life without him. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Liam first. "Some people believe a child can be an inconvenience," I said. "Others believe a child is a gift. Loving you has never felt like a burden. It has felt like a purpose. You made me a mother. You made me brave. And when I doubted whether I should speak, you stood up and spoke for us both." Liam's eyes shimmered. He didn't cry, he just nodded, holding it in like a grown man. I turned to Nathan. "You never asked me to quiet who I was. You never made me shrink to fit into your world. You didn't just accept my son, you loved him first, and that's why I trust you with every part of me." After we exchanged vows and rings, the officiant smiled and said, "You may now kiss the bride." Before we could move, Liam's voice rang out from the side. "Now you can kiss!" Laughter erupted around the room. Nathan kissed me, and when we turned to walk down the aisle, we didn't walk out as 2 people. We walked out as 3. At the reception that followed, we danced under strings of warm lights. Liam had his own mini spotlight on the dance floor, twirling and laughing, running between tables with frosting on his cheek. Nathan's dad lifted him onto his shoulders, and someone started a conga line. I stood with a glass of champagne, watching my son light up the room, and I felt something in my chest loosen and settle. It wasn't peace with my father or forgiveness for Elise. It was something stronger. It was acceptance that they were never capable of being who I needed them to be. And it was the quiet, steady understanding that I had stopped needing there. Approval altogether. I had spent years waiting for my father to see me, for him to claim me, validate me, to make room for my life. In doing that, I had stayed silent in too many moments where I should have stood up. But this time, I had spoken. Or rather, Liam had spoken. And his voice carried the weight of all the things I had swallowed. Later that night, as I tucked him into bed in our suite, he looked up at me and asked, "Did I make it better or worse?" "You made it true," I said. He nodded. "That's good, right?" I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "That's the best thing you could have done." And it was. Because in one moment of courage, with a microphone too big for his hands, and a voice clear enough to silence a room, my son reminded everyone exactly what love is supposed to look like. Not polite, not perfect, not quiet, but honest, fierce, unshakable, and forever. Sometimes it takes the smallest voice in the room to speak the biggest truth. My son reminded me that silence protects no one, and that family isn't about blood or appearances. It's about love that shows up, stands up, and speaks up when it matters most. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something or reminded you of your own power to protect what matters, please take a moment to like the video. It helps. More people hear stories that deserve to be told. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up for someone when no one else would? I read every single one, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you believe in the power of truth, love, and real family, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this again. Thank you for watching, thank you for feeling this with me, and most of all, thank you for listening.